March 17th, 1401. A day that will live in infamy. A massive army raids the great city of Damascus, which has been under siege for months. Despite promises that the city would be spared if it surrendered, the conquerors' forces lay waste to everything, burning, enslaving, killing tens of thousands, even destroying the ancient Umayyad mosque. 20 years later, people could still see the devastation. And this was just one act of destruction by a ruler who would dominate Asia from the Levant to India. His name, Timur, founder of the Timurid Empire. The Iron Boy. The man we know as Timur was born on April 9th, 1336, near the town of Kesh in Central Asia, now called Shahrisabz, in southern Uzbekistan. Today, a massive 10-meter statue stands there honoring the city's most famous son. His name means iron, and legend says that when he was born, there was an unusual amount of blood on his tiny palms, a sign he would shed much blood in his lifetime. His father, Taragai, was a minor aristocratic lord of the Barlas clan, a Turco-Mongol tribe. His mother, virtually unknown to history. But to understand Timur's rise, we need to understand the world he was born into. Mongol legacy. For centuries, Turkish groups had dominated Central Asia, but in the early 1200s, a Mongolian warlord named Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan, united the Mongolian tribes and conquered Central Asia. Timur's clan, the Barlas, was one of the Mongol clans that joined Genghis Khan's armies. By the time Timur was born, the massive Mongol Empire had splintered into 4 states. Timur was born in the Chagatai Khanate, which controlled lands around modern Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. But things had changed. The Mongols had intermarried with the Turks, adopted Islam, and lived in cities influenced by Persian and Arab culture. The empire Timur would build reflected this complex blend. The rise. We know almost nothing about Timur's childhood. The sources, written decades after his death, are filled with legends, not facts. The first concrete details come from 1360, when he was already in his mid-20s. The Chagatai Khanate was collapsing. Rival lords fought for power. And in this chaos, Timur emerged. First, he allied with a Mongol Khan trying to reassert control. Then he abandoned that alliance and partnered with Amir Hussein, ruler of Balkh. They became raiders, little more than bandits attacking towns across the region. In 1363, everything changed. While serving in a military campaign, Timur was struck by several arrows. One hit his shoulder, then his other hand, removing 2 fingers. But the worst was to his right leg, a deep wound that left him permanently lame. From that day forward, he was known as Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane. But instead of breaking him, the injury seemed to fuel him. His rise as a warlord began almost immediately. The conquest begins. In 1360, Timur and Hussein captured Samarkand, the ancient capital of the Chagatai Khanate. But success bred rivalry. Who was really in charge? By 1370, the 2 former allies were at war. Timur emerged victorious, capturing and executing Hussein. He declared himself governor of the Chagatai Khanate and lord of the Fortunate Conjunction, an astrological title imbued with meaning. Historians mark 1370 as the beginning of the Timurid Empire.
But Timur had a problem: legitimacy. In the 14th century, any would-be ruler in Central Asia needed to prove descent from Genghis Khan. Timur's solution was clever. First, he installed a puppet Khan descended from Genghis. Then he married the widow of his former rival, a woman descended from Genghis, claiming the title Timur Guregen, son-in-law of the great Khan. Later, fanciful genealogies would even claim he was directly descended from Genghis by blood. He also proclaimed himself the Sword of Islam, a religious warlord, though ironically, most of his violence would be directed at fellow Muslims. The campaigns. Timur was a prolific family man. He married at least a dozen times throughout his life, mostly for political alliances, and had dozens of children. His eldest sons were born in the 1350s, and by the end of his reign, his sprawling family ruled vast territories. But Timur wasn't interested in staying home. As early as 1372, barely 2 years after securing Samarkand, he set off west with his armies. First, he conquered the kingdom of Khorazm. Then, he intervened in the Golden Horde to install a friendly ruler named Toktamish. Then, he turned south, spending the late 1370s and early 1380s conquering the great cities of eastern Persia and Afghanistan. Psychological warfare. By 1382, his reputation for psychological warfare was established. When a rebellion broke out in Khorasan, he punished the town of Isfazar by taking 2,000 inhabitants prisoner and cementing them alive into a giant tower of clay, brick, and human bodies. Those who survived the construction were left to starve. His methods were brutal and effective.
The First Middle Eastern Campaign. In 1385, Timur launched his first major campaign into the Middle East, commanding armies of over 100,000 men. He rampaged through western Persia, Mesopotamia, and the Caucasus, even briefly seizing Tbilisi in Georgia. But then word arrived. His former ally Toktamish had betrayed him, invading Central Asia while Timur was away. Timur had no choice but to race back east. The battle. For years, the two armies shadowed each other across Central Asia. Then, in June 1391, they met at the Battle of the Kondurcha River in Russia. Despite being outnumbered, Timur's disciplined troops, some armed with early firearms, held the line. Toktamish's army broke and fled. The Golden Horde's threat was neutralized, and Timur could finally return to his ultimate goal, the conquest of Baghdad. The 5-year campaign. In 1392, Timur embarked on what would be his most consequential campaign, 5 years of relentless conquest. By 1393, Baghdad had submitted without resistance. He campaigned through Georgia, defeated Toktamish again at the Terek River, even rampaged into southwestern Russia. By the time he returned home in late 1396, his empire stretched from Baghdad to the Himalayas. The Timurid Renaissance. After the 5-year campaign, Timur spent nearly 2 years in Samarkand, the longest period he'd ever stayed in one place, and he used this time to build. A massive construction program began, monumental mosques, schools promoting mathematics and philosophy, and the flourishing of art, geometric tile work, jade carving, fine metalwork. The Gur-e-Amir Mosque, with its stunning 30-meter dome covered in turquoise tiles, stands to this day as a testament to Timurid architecture. His grandson, Ulugh Beg, would later build the Registan Plaza and the Ulugh Beg Observatory, important centers of learning. The Timurid Renaissance was one of the great cultural revivals of the 14th and 15th centuries. Wealth of the Silk Roads. Where did the wealth come from?
The Silk Roads, the vast network of trade routes connecting the Far East to Europe, were at their peak. Silk from China, spices from India, jade, gunpowder, paper, all passed through Central Asia. Cities like Samarkand, Tashkent, and Bukhara grew rich on this trade. Timur's empire facilitated it. A merchant could travel from Mongolia to the Middle East without ever leaving Timurid lands.
The final campaigns. In 1398, Timur set off again, this time south into India. Late that year, he sacked Delhi, massacring the population and plundering the city. It would take a century to recover. Then, in 1399, he launched his third and final campaign into the Middle East. The horrors. What followed was arguably his most violent campaign yet. When Damascus fell after a 3-month siege, Timur's armies mass murdered the population. Ibn Arab-Shah, enslaved as a child during this attack, wrote that 20 years later, the city still hadn't recovered. At Baghdad, after the city was sacked, Timur's forces built 120 towers from the decapitated heads of 90,000 people. Demographers estimate Timur's wars resulted in 10 to 20 million deaths. Cultural impact. Timur's reputation spread across the world. In 1402, he even sent a letter, still preserved today, to King Charles VI of France. Later, composers like Handel and Vivaldi wrote operas featuring Timur. Edgar Allan Poe published a poetry collection titled Tamerlane the Great. The Final Gathering. After his conquests, Timur returned to Samarkand and convened a massive Kurultai, a traditional Mongol gathering in autumn 1404. It lasted 2 months. Thousands of leaders assembled in giant tents. Feasts and festivals every day. Wine flowed freely. Merchants set up temporary shops outside the city. A Spanish nobleman named Ruy González de Clavijo visited at this time and wrote that Samarkand was a city of 150,000 people, twice the size of London, filled with richness and abundance. But Clavijo never got his official audience with Timur, because the emperor was preparing for one final campaign, the conquest of China. Timur set off eastward in late 1404, but not long after leaving, near Otrar in Kazakhstan, he fell ill. On February 18, 1405, after becoming bedridden with a severe fever, Timur died. He was laid to rest in the Gur-e-Amir Mosque in Samarkand, the very building he had commissioned. The succession. The empire he left behind quickly contracted. A civil war erupted between his sons and grandsons. By 1409, Shahrukh had united the empire, but rebellions broke out in distant territories. By the 1880s, the Timurid Empire had shrunk to just Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, northern Afghanistan, and parts of Iran. The Mughal Empire. But from the ruins, something new emerged. In the 1490s, Timur's great-great-great-grandson, Babur, began his own conquests. In 1526, he captured Delhi and founded the Mughal Empire, which would rule northern India for 300 years. The Taj Mahal and other Mughal monuments reflect Timurid architectural styles, echoes of Samarkand in the heart of India. The curse. There's one final twist to Timur's story. Legend says his tomb in Samarkand is cursed. In 1740, a Persian ruler took a jade slab from the tomb. His son fell ill. Advisors told him to return it, and when he did, his son recovered. Then, in June 1941, Soviet anthropologists opened Timur's tomb. Local elders warned them not to. They found an inscription inside. "A great vengeance will come to those who disturb my rest." Days later, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Over the next 4 years, 25 million Soviet citizens would die. Stalin was so concerned that he ordered a formal Islamic reburial in November 1942. Right around that time, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus and turned the tide at Stalingrad. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the curse of Timur's tomb has fascinated people ever since. Conclusion. Timur was a ruler of contrasts. He rose from obscurity to carve out one of history's largest empires, stretching from Syria to the Himalayas, from Russia to the Indus River. He was responsible for the deaths of millions. Ancient cities like Delhi, Damascus, and Baghdad were devastated by his armies. But he was also a patron of art, architecture, and scholarship. He transformed Samarkand into one of the world's great cities. The Timurid Renaissance flourished under his rule and influenced Central Asian culture for centuries. Through his descendant Babur, his legacy lived on in the Mughal Empire, one of the greatest empires in Indian history. Like Genghis Khan before him, Timur was a complex figure. A brutal conqueror, but not without cultural achievements. So, what do you think? Was Timur simply a murderous warlord, or was he a sophisticated ruler whose legacy is more nuanced than history often remembers? Let us know in the comments. And thank you very much for watching.